And therefore, that is the fireside chat that we have now in the next session, where we have our guest who's going to talk about what really drives the profitability. And the question goes to revenue managers, asking them, are revenue managers taking enough risks to drive profitability? And let me introduce you, Mary Ake. She is the Vice President, Revenue Management with Jumeirah Group, taking over this chat in a candid conversation with David Thompson, the Vice President for First Group. Over to you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. I would like to introduce you to David Thompson. He's the Senior Vice President of Branding and Business Development at the First Group. He's a UAE veteran. He's been here for over 33 years, and he's one of us. He started his career in sales and marketing at Hilton and had several roles since then, one of them being the Chief Operating Officer at Jebel Ali Resorts, and he's now been part of First Group for the last 5 years. The First Group, they have around 10 hotels. They have their own brand, which is the First Collection. They have 3 hotels here in the UAE, and one of them actually recently opened in Business Bay. And besides that, they have a number of franchise hotels with some of the big brands. So welcome, David. Thank you so much for being here.
That was a very accurate description. Thank you.
Clearly, in your career, you've worked with a lot of revenue leaders, right? In your current role, but also in your previous roles. So instead of, I guess, talking about AI, which has been a hot topic, especially today, we want to focus more on the people in our conversation. What would you say are the traits/skills that successful revenue leaders have in common?
Look, I think, in order to be a successful revenue leader, it's really, today is very different to what it used to be. So when I first started out many, many years ago, you'd have your BRMs or your revenue meeting, and the sales would argue with revenue, but the information streams that they had in those days were much more limited. You'd do your night manager's report, phoning around other hotels, you would talk to your partners, but essentially where you got your information was, as I say, quite limited. Today, that has changed a lot. And I think for a good revenue manager today needs to be a bit of a magician, because it's very important that he's getting the data that he requires, and there's a lot now more technology available that can give him that data. He's got to understand his guests, so he's got to have his finger on the pulse in terms of guest feedback and what it is they want. He's got to be looking at new markets and how do you access those new markets. And then, of course, he's got to be looking at his own market and see where he pitches, in terms of the revenue that he's actually looking at, in terms of the rates that he's asking for and what impact that's going to have. So it's a lot harder to be a very good revenue, well, you know this better than I do. In fact, it should be the other way around, this conversation. But yeah, it's a lot easier to be a revenue manager a few years ago than it is today, for sure.
So do you think the level of importance a revenue leader takes within the organization has also changed because of that?
I think it should. I think that's the transition that hasn't actually happened as yet. I think you're still seeing the sales and marketing guys being, leading the conversation too much, actually, in many respects. I think revenue should be the big dog in the room, to be honest. They're the ones that should have all the information. They should be able to set the rates, and the rest of the people should be, working hard to support whatever the revenue manager comes up with, which is, so we've seen really a change in structures. So you're looking at, as we go forward now, you're looking at more commercial, chief commercial officers or commercial officers coming into the business who are overseeing revenue, sales, and marketing separately. And I think, that should be, for me, the way that people look at setting themselves up going forward.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think that is quite a hot debate, isn't it? Like, what should the commercial structure look like? Should there be one commercial leader at the top? Should it be sales and marketing combined, or sales and marketing separate? Should they all report into the GM or to one commercial leader? And I guess there's a lot of legacy there, so it's not that easy to make changes. But if you were able to apply zero-based thinking to the commercial structure, and you could start all over again, in your opinion, what should the structure look like?
Well, I think you'd probably look to have a commercial leader who looked over the three disciplines for sure. I think that person has to be a bit of a geek, to be honest, and they've got to be able to understand the information that's coming in and be able to process the information. But to be honest, there's so much technology out there that can allow you to do that. It's just how do you read the information that's coming in? And I think that's one of the things that a revenue person has to do today, which they didn't have to do necessarily a few years ago, is how do you take all that data and then make it into something that is actually implementable, so that you're not just getting sort of paralysis by analysis, but you're able to sort of take that data and act on it. And I think there's a lot of tools that will help you do that, so you don't actually have to sit there and do it yourself. So I think I would definitely say that you'd need a commercial person looking over the three disciplines for sure, and making sure that they're working together in harmony rather than against each other.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of a general manager, what do you believe their background should be? Is there an ideal mix of background? I think historically, a lot of general managers are coming from an operational background. Do you think that is changing? Is it more important that they have some commercial acumen and come from either a sales, revenue, or marketing discipline?
Yeah, look, I think once upon a time it was all F&B, then it all became operations. There's a lot more sales and marketing guys coming through into the general manager role. But I think if you've got strong commercial people, I think what you really need are general managers who are actually focusing on their operation. And I think there is enough to be done within a hotel in order to make sure that the guest experience is really as good as it can be, that you're providing value for money, that you're making sure that your property is offering the right sort of technology. Again, it all comes back to technology, sadly. But the guest experience is very high. And I think that's where, you've got to have people focusing on the disciplines that they can do. And, I know someone earlier talked about the idea that everyone should have a sort of taste of revenue management. But I think, if you're going to do this properly, you've got to have experts in each field. And operations in itself requires experts.
Yeah, okay. Obviously, the industry has gone through quite a lot of change, right, in the last 3 years. We experienced the lowest level of revenues. We had hotels even closed. And thankfully, I think in many markets, the demand has now returned to 2019 levels and in some cases exceeded it. Have you seen a change in behavior in revenue leaders pre and post pandemic when it comes to risk taking?
I think we'd like to see them take a lot more risks. I think that's the whole idea. I think the person who introduced us just now said if you're not taking risks, then you're really not going to be driving your business. And I think that, what we see at the moment is a situation where a lot of benchmarking, and listen, there's some fantastic tools out there, SDR being one of them, in terms of how you see how your property is doing. But if there's too much emphasis on benchmarking and on how you're doing against your comp set, you're not taking the risks that you should be taking. And I think a lot of markets opened up as a result of COVID. Obviously, we saw the OTAs really grab a foothold. They'd already had one, but they took a much bigger foothold in the market. And I think, in terms of, and we were obliged to look further afield for the markets that would come, particularly into Dubai. You saw the Americas really opening up after COVID and new markets being developed. Obviously, we were very lucky with the Russian market. I say lucky, I apologize for that phrase, but, circumstances always, one man's, poison is good for somebody else. And obviously, we've benefited greatly from the situations that are going on in Europe at the moment. So, but yes, I think, revenue managers do have to change the way they look and where they operate for sure.
So we can take more risk, but do you believe there is already, progress within that? There is more risk taking today than it was pre-pandemic, and we still have a way to go?
Yeah, I think we still have a way to go, I would say. I mean, look, I think revenue managers are beginning to actually make their presence felt a lot more, I think, which is really important. And I think, I know in some companies, the revenue managers dictate the rate and, you're not allowed to move off that rate, whether if you're a GM or what have you. And that's something that I would definitely applaud, to be honest, because as long as these people are getting the right information and getting fed the right sort of statistics.
More decision making by revenue managers rather than general managers?
Yes.
Okay.
No?
Mona's got an opinion on this. Do you want to join us?
No, I think, look, I've been in this argument for many years, and having been a GM for a long time, an operational person I started in sales and marketing, I then moved into operations, and then from operations into overseeing the companies and what have you. And one of the things I do know is that, I think there's this whole, excuse me, I just melt on stage, but there's this whole discussion around, who has the responsibility. So if you give it all to the commercial people, if you say that the revenue managers, how are you holding your GMs responsible, right? That's one of the big questions that people ask. You want your general managers to be responsible for the businesses they're running. Yes and no. At the end of the day, what are the general managers doing? The general managers are running operations. And it's really important that they're held responsible for their operations. So their guest satisfaction levels, the way the actual hotel ticks and operates, that is definitely their responsibility. But when it comes to, there's too much information out there now to expect a general manager to be able to run his operation, find out all he needs to do about guest feedback, what the best revenue streams are for him, what the distribution channels are. So I think it's more the experts that should be doing this rather than the general managers, for sure. That's my opinion.
And how do you think general managers or owners can support and create a culture where that risk-taking is then also encouraged?
Yeah, 100%. And I don't think it's just the general managers. I think it's owners and the stakeholders that need to be encouraging people to take greater risks. And I think we're traditionally, and we've talked a lot about the fact that hospitality tends to be slow to adopt technology and what have you, because again, it's the risk. Where do I invest my money? Do I invest it in this particular technology, knowing that in 6 months' time someone may come up with something that's better? So there's always this sort of, and then you sort of almost get left behind, right? I mean, I know at the moment Jumeirah are trialing this facial recognition, which I think is great, and it'll be good to see that come into the business. But I think, it's really important that stakeholders understand that if they really want to get something out of their business, they've got to allow people to take risks. And there's too much, I was going to say too much at stake, but there's too many people worried about benchmarking and where they are to actually take those risks. And I think people have got to stop looking at how their other people are doing and start looking at what they can do with their own property and how much they can get from that.
Great, thank you. I guess one of the other debates often within revenue management is whether revenue leaders are supposed to look after rooms revenue, or should they take an approach of total hotel revenue management. And I guess over the years there's been some progress, but I think we debate it every year here as well in Rock for the last 3-5 years, many years. And I guess there's very little, action or improvement in that area being made. What is your expectation on this in terms of the revenue leaders taking the lead on total hotel revenue management?
No, I think otherwise you're going to leave money on the table. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. I appreciate, when it comes to reservations, the difficulties involved in trying to get, you want to make the reservation, but you also at the same time want to talk about the food and beverage and the spa and everything else. So I appreciate that is a very difficult process for a phone call. But there are plenty of other ways in order to interact with your guests without having to speak to them on the phone in order to get them to book other activities. And I think if you're not doing that, then, as I say, you're leaving money on the table for sure. Because a lot of people will come to your property and not go through the guest directory, not find out, whether it's online or an app or whatever it happens to be, but not know what it is that you have on offer. And I think it's really important to put that in front of the guests before they come so that they can make decisions, book up in advance. Obviously, also it helps you when it comes to manning levels, in terms of, organizing your schedules and your rosters for the day. This sort of thing is really important. And I think, the more you can sell in advance, of course, the greater it is for the company.
Yeah. And what do you think is the reason that I guess we haven't progressed as much in this topic as we would have liked to see at this point? What is
I think people just think it's too difficult. I think, it's much easier just to sell a room, get them in. We're hoteliers, we run rooms at the end of the day, and all these other good things as sort of add-ons to. And we talk about the guest experience and how that's the most important thing. It's been this sort of big thing about the guest experience and experiential travel and all the rest of it. But if we're not actually giving them that opportunity to experience what we have on offer, then the two actually work against each other, don't they? So I think getting people to book a room is a lot easier than getting them to book a room and a spa treatment and a golf lesson and whatever it is you happen to offer. So I think, but I think it's a pain that you have to go through. You have to find ways of doing that in order to make sure you're generating the greatest amount of revenue you can.
And is there more investment required in this area in terms of technology or people to make that happen going forward?
Yeah, look, technology. We talk about things like AI replacing us all, which it probably will do eventually. But there is so much technology out there. I guess the biggest problem is which one to go for. We've been looking at a variety now of different technologies, which in order to make the guest experience faster, the whole check-in process faster, making sure that if they've got any feedback they want to give, that we're getting that immediately while they're in house, and there's a variety, but it's just, again, it's like you almost get to the point where you're looking at so many of these things, you've got to make a decision when you're going to do that. But yes, technology is there to help us, and we have to seize that.
We have a few minutes left, and so I want to ask you one more final question, and then I'll check and see if the audience has got any questions. We talked about owners before, and of course also general managers. They're really important stakeholders, for all the commercial leaders here in the room. What would be your advice on how they could improve their engagement with their owners, for example?
Yeah, look, transparency. This is one of the biggest problems that we have, isn't it? We all want, when we're putting proposals together in order to take over a property, we give the best possible numbers, because obviously we want to be the guys that they pick to go forward with. But then delivering on those numbers becomes a problem. And not always, I'm not saying that happens every time, but delivering to owners is one of the biggest problems that we all have. And delivering to owner expectations, and not being transparent from day one is something, because we all want to be the guy that they pick in the room, right? So, or the girl. But so it's, I think, one thing I've learned over the years is it always comes back to bite you in the end if you're not completely transparent. And I'd much rather have get the pain on the table right at the beginning and have those difficult conversations around, what are your expectations? What do you really think that I can achieve for you? What do you want to achieve? Rather than constantly having this backwards and forwards all the time because you're not delivering to their expectations because you never bothered to find out what they were.
Yeah.
And over-promising and under-delivering. It's actually quite criminal that in this business we're one of the worst offenders of any business in over-promising and under-delivering. And, that's something we've got to stop doing.
Thank you. That's great advice. Get the pain on the table. I like it. Thank you so much, David. It's been great talking to you. I just want to see in the audience if you've got any questions for David. Any takers?
Go on, Mona. You must have something to say.
I don't think we've got any questions. So thank you, David, and thank you all for joining our session.
Thank you.